There are days that change your life quietly. No thunder. No accident. Just a buzz. A vibration. A tiny ripple that shifts everything. It was a morning like any other, soft and slow, sun curling through beige curtains. The air smelled faintly of setting spray and overripe strawberries. Somewhere in the clatter of rings and receipts, a phone screen lit up, bright, urgent, and unapologetically digital. Keila didn't open the app out of hope. Hope required energy. This was curiosity. Boredom dressed in lingerie. She hadn't eaten yet. She hadn't even brushed her teeth. But her thumb was already swiping left, 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 until it wasn't. His profile was quiet. No shirtless mirror photos. No gym flexes or captions about God first. Just 5 words, stark and surgical. I only like honest women. She paused. Blinked. Looked again. No filters. No background distractions. Just him, jawline like a promise, skin like he drank expensive water, and eyes that knew too much. She swiped right. A second later, he did too. The match dissolved into conversation almost immediately. There was no spark, just fire. The kind that hums beneath your ribcage when you know you're doing something dangerous. She told herself she wouldn't go. Told herself she had work to do. Content to film. Edges to lay. But somehow, as the sun dipped behind high-rise silhouettes and the city clicked into night mode, Keila was sliding into heels and wiping gloss across her lips. Wine-colored dress. Backless. Paired with black boots that threatened mercy. Hair slicked, a face beat to bloodless perfection. She looked like revenge. Like she didn't care. Like she hadn't already replayed his voice note 15 times. She arrived fashionably 6 minutes late. He was already there, waiting, leaning against the wall like time bowed for him. No urgency in his stance. Just calm. Intentional. Like he knew what would happen, and was only curious about how. He smelled like cinnamon and clean skin. He said her name once and never again. And yet, she never forgot the way it landed in his mouth like something sacred. They climbed stairs together. The rooftop was humming. A tangle of neon, laughter, trap soul, and overpriced cocktails. Their first drink tasted like berry and bravado. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Her laughter filled spaces they hadn't even entered. His silence was confident, not cold. Every time she spoke, he listened like the world went mute. There were others around them, waiters, friends of friends, exes disguised as strangers, but they faded. Quickly. Completely. Midnight came too fast. So did the excuses. She needed to go home. He needed to call a driver. The rain was threatening. The air was sticky with heat. None of it mattered. By 1:20 a.m., they were back in her space. City lights blinking through half-drawn blinds. Shoes abandoned. Phones ignored. They kissed like they'd done it before. Like they were catching up, not beginning. No awkwardness. No explanations. Just breath and skin and unspoken consent. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't slow either. It was deliberate. Like each motion had already been decided hours ago. Like their bodies had been texting behind their backs. He didn't ask to stay. He just did. At 2:03 a.m., Zire was asleep, his arm wrapped loosely around her waist. His heartbeat pulsed against her shoulder blades. But Keila was wide awake. Staring at the ceiling. Memorizing the shape of the moment. This wasn't like the others. This didn't feel borrowed. Or broken. This felt like a door she hadn't knocked on, but was standing inside anyway. She didn't know his middle name. Didn't know where he'd gone to school. But something about him felt familiar. Not in the cliché sense. Not in the soulmate type of way. Familiar like déjà vu. Like that moment when you hear the end of a song and realize you've been humming it all day. Her phone buzzed again. A software update. The dating app had crashed and rebooted. Everyone's matches gone. As if nothing ever happened. She didn't check it. She looked at him instead. Still asleep. Still calm. Still the same man who'd simply written, "I only like honest women." She wondered what kind of honest he meant. Because her truth? She was already in too deep. And they hadn't even had breakfast yet. There are mornings that lie. Mornings that pretend nothing happened the night before. This wasn't one of them. Keila didn't remember falling asleep. Only waking up to the scent of warm skin and unfamiliar comfort. Zire still slept beside her, one hand curled under the pillow, the other draped over her waist like it belonged there. She didn't move. Not because she didn't want to. Because she was scared if she did, the moment might vanish. The phone on the floor vibrated once. She didn't reach for it. She looked at him instead. His mouth, slightly parted. His chest, rising slowly. The soft exhale of someone unbothered. Uncomplicated. That was the lie. They didn't talk much after. No post-game analysis. No what now conversation. He handed her her boot like a gentleman, but laced it like a man who knew what it had undone. Outside, the sun had nerve. Too loud. Too bright. Everything about the morning felt like it didn't care what they'd done. Zire walked her to the stairs but didn't follow. He just leaned against the railing, watching her go. Not possessively. Not regretfully. Just still. She didn't look back. But she felt it. That invisible thread. Still tugging. The problem with chemistry is it doesn't care about plans. Or timelines. Or trauma. Keila had work. Deadlines. A life that didn't include a man who kissed like he'd memorized her mouth in a past life. But he stayed in her head. Worse, he stayed in her body. Like scent. Like heat. Like the afterburn of something that didn't hurt yet, but would. She didn't text him. He didn't call her. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. Charged. That kind of tension that made you wonder who would break first. Days passed. Her friends noticed. Her outfits got tighter. Her music got slower. Even her sarcasm softened around the edges. She wasn't falling. She was already down. She just hadn't told her legs to stay. On Friday, he messaged. Same spot. Same time. No small talk. She stared at it longer than she should have. And didn't reply. But when 9 p.m. came, she was already outside. She told herself it was the last time. The last glass of wine, the last quiet walk back to his car, the last moment of leaning too close without touching. But endings have a way of slipping through your fingers when the beginning never had rules. Keila's days were normal on the surface. She still went to work, still answered emails, still stood in line for coffee with the rest of the city's tired dreamers. But under it all, there was this pulse. A rhythm that matched the memory of his hands on the steering wheel, his eyes catching hers at red lights, the slight curl of his mouth when she laughed without meaning to. He wasn't hers. Not in the way that came with labels or promises. He was something far more dangerous, the one person she allowed to exist in her life without an explanation. Nights with Zire had become a pattern neither of them admitted to. They never set a time, but somehow, it was always the same hour. They never called, but somehow, they both knew when to show up. It was raining that evening, the kind of rain that made the streetlights blur into golden halos. Keila almost didn't go. Almost. But she knew he'd be there, leaning against the car, hands in pockets, wearing that jacket that made him look like trouble stitched in leather. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against wet pavement.
"You're late,"
he said, not looking at her. "You're early," she replied, brushing past him to the passenger seat. He didn't start the engine right away. Just sat there, fingers tapping the steering wheel, as if waiting for her to say something she wasn't ready to give. And that's when she realized, whatever this was, they had never defined it. And maybe that's why it worked. Or maybe, that's why it was going to burn. The city felt different at night. Not quieter, not louder, just different, like it was holding its breath. Keila walked slowly along the curved boardwalk, the sound of her heels softened by the rain-worn wood. The lake beside her was ink-black, the moon cutting a silver path across its restless surface. Her champagne silk blouse clung in places where the air was damp, cream trousers moving in perfect rhythm with each step. She wasn't here by accident, she never was. From across the water, Zire stood in the shadow of the old glass pavilion, hands buried in the pockets of his black leather jacket. His lean frame shifted, a restless energy just beneath the stillness. He wasn't supposed to be here either. And yet, here they both were, drawn to the same edge of the night like moths circling the same flame. They didn't speak at first. Instead, they watched each other through the space between, that fragile strip of distance heavy with everything they hadn't said in months. Her curls caught the faint light, framing her heart-shaped face like they had the very first time he saw her. His jaw was sharp, lips set but not cold, eyes catching hers like they'd been waiting. A few steps closer, and the air shifted. "Zire," said finally, her voice low, more a memory than a greeting.
"Keila,"
he replied, the way he said her name making it feel like it belonged to him. He studied her the way one studies a map they've memorized but are afraid to forget, tracing every detail with his eyes. She didn't look away. Neither of them did. And then the wind came, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint sweetness of the flowering trees along the shore. It was too much like before. "Why here?" she asked, glancing around as though the place might answer for him.
"Because it's the only place the noise fades,"
he said, his voice rough but sure. They stood there, suspended in a space that wasn't quite past and wasn't yet future, the kind of place you can't live in but never really live. The rain began to fall again, gentle at first, then heavier, turning the world around them into blurred reflections. Zire took a slow step forward, and another, closing the distance until they stood in the same shadow. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. But everything in their bodies leaned toward it. The space between them was gone, and yet, it was everywhere. The city had begun to exhale the day's heat, trading it for a cool evening breeze that drifted through the narrow streets of Lamera like a whispered secret. Neon signs flickered to life one by one, each pulse of light painting the sidewalks in shifting colors. Somewhere far off, music bled from an open bar door, laughter spilling out into the night. But for Keila, the world was muted, as if someone had turned the volume down on everything except the sound of her own heartbeat. She walked with purpose, though her feet didn't entirely trust the path. The familiar scent of rain on old stone clung to the air, mixing with the faint perfume she'd dabbed on hours ago, a scent that now felt like armor. In her mind, every step was a negotiation between courage and caution. Zire was already there when she arrived, leaning against the hood of a black sedan parked under a lone street lamp. The light wrapped around him like a cinematic frame, turning every sharp angle of his jaw, every shadow along his cheekbones, into something dangerously magnetic. His leather jacket hung open, revealing a charcoal shirt that clung to the lean muscle beneath. His gaze found her instantly, sharp but unreadable, as though trying to decide whether to pull her in or push her away. They stood there for a moment, no words, only the static-filled silence that comes before a storm neither of them could control. The air between them wasn't empty. It was thick with all the almost confessions, the nearly brushed lips, the countless times they'd walked away when they wanted to stay. Keila's eyes traced him, not with casual curiosity, but with the hunger of someone memorizing a face for the last time. She told herself this was just another chapter closing, but something deep inside whispered that it was more, that every decision from here would leave a mark. Zire's voice, when it finally came, was low enough to be stolen by the breeze.
Keila. Are you sure about this?
Her breath caught, because the question wasn't really about tonight. It was about everything. The streetlight hummed softly above them. A distant car horn cut through the quiet. Somewhere inside her chest, her heart tilted toward him, daring her to take that final step forward. She did. The space between them vanished in less than a heartbeat, and in that instant, the city around them disappeared, no neon lights, no wet cobblestones, no voices from passing strangers. Only the sound of two people colliding with something they had spent far too long resisting. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It was slow, deliberate, full of all the things they had tried to bury. Her fingers curled into the collar of his jacket. His hands found her waist like they had always belonged there. And then, they broke apart, breathless, eyes locked. Not because the moment was over, but because they both knew it was only the beginning. Keila turned slightly, glancing down the street as if to remind herself there was still a world out there waiting for her. Zire stayed still, watching her like she was a secret he'd just been given permission to keep. The night swallowed the rest of their words, but their eyes promised more than either was ready to say out loud. Under the dim glow of that lone street lamp, they stood, two people who had finally stepped off the edge.